How's it going, everyone? I know that I haven't posted a video in a while, and I'm trying to make a doozy here, right? Trying to make some very informative stuff now. So I hope that I can make up for that with this current video. But I've been working on this little personal project for a while. I know there's a lot going on my screen right now, but I kind of always I like the view of like just seeing the application and all the imagery and stuff in the software. I dig that. I think it's kind of cool looking. But I want to share my process, right? Over the process of making this, over the course of making this, I've been trying to think of ways to share my process, share my techniques and how I come about doing this and doing things like this. And I'm always trying to push myself a little bit further. And I think it's important to do art that kind of makes you uncomfortable, right? Like stuff that you've never done before, try to learn new skills and things like that. So that's sort of what I've been doing with this. But I've really been trying to think of how I can share my progress while I'm doing this stuff, and I've had kind of a hard time wrapping my brain around that, right? Um, I could just record everything and then edit like 100 hours of video down to like an hour or something like that. I don't really want to do that, right? I don't really enjoy editing as much as I enjoy doing stuff like this. I also thought about maybe just setting up like my nice camera behind me so you get like a nice view of my screen and me working on it. And you can see like what I have going on all around me. I have one of these really wide screen monitors, um, or maybe a combination of all of that stuff, right? But I would really like to share my process because when I was learning stuff, those were always the videos that I kind of ate up, right? Or when you get to see just how someone works, right? Those were I felt like I learned more than any tutorial could ever teach me, right? Just like watching somebody work. So I really want to do that, and I really want to kind of share my process. And I also think when you do that, you kind of um, open up a dialogue with your viewers, and they can kind of say, "Hey, it's cool that you did it this way, but have you ever tried it this way?" Or right, like you're kind of exposing yourself, making yourself vulnerable to criticism for sure, but you're also you're opening yourself up for the opportunity for improvement, right? So over the past like couple months or so, probably over the past year, I've kind of had this sort of fire lit under me where I really want to start working on. I want to get serious about the art that I'm doing again. Um, just because of personal things, I've had a lot of issues with just like motivation and ambition, and I'm trying to get back into that. Right, I'm trying to view the eyes or view the world with the eyes of a child again, so to speak. So, and what really helps me out with that is just sharing my work, sharing my process, and things like that. So I think for now, I may, change this up quite a bit, but I think for now, the best way for me to do that is just talk about my mindset, talk about my process, talk about like how I did this and how I did that. Talk about some technical stuff and talk about some conceptual stuff as well. And yeah, I always love hearing suggestions from my audience, from my viewers. So this may be a long video. I hope it's not too long, but this may be a long video because I do have a lot of stuff I want to talk about. So if you enjoy this kind of thing, let me know. If you think it's really boring, I've been told that my voice is like ASMR and kind of puts people to sleep sometimes, which I kind of take that as a compliment. But it's not the greatest thing when I'm trying to teach people, right? Because they obviously lose interest and kind of fall asleep. I don't like yelling, right? I don't like yelling at people. A lot of these YouTubers, not to not to talk trash about them. Some of my favorite YouTubers have really loud, expressive voices, and they're very good at keeping your attention. Um, that's not me. I just don't. Like, for one thing, my voice just can't handle it. Right. I talk all day in the classroom, and I'll lose my voice at some point. Right. So I don't enjoy yelling at people, even in a positive way. um, I what else do I want to say here before we get started? A lot of the things you'll see in the scene have some sort of sentimental meaning to me, or they reference something in my life, and I'm not going to talk about the meaning of every little thing in this. So I think the one great thing about art is the viewer uses their own interpretation. Um, this has nothing to do with Guardians of the Galaxy or Rocket Raccoon. I just I love animals and raccoons especially. I just think they're really cool animals. Um, don't try not to judge me too harshly if you see my outliner and how messy it is. I know as a teacher, I'm always teaching my students to try to stay clean and organized, and I try to stay clean and organized. But I come from a traditional art background, and I've always been kind of um, a messy artist, right? Digitally or physically, traditionally, I've always been sort of a messy artist. So I try to stay organized. It's the battle we all fight, right? So try not to judge me too harshly if you see a very messy, unorganized scene here. Also, I'm just doing this for me, right? I'm not working. I'm not sending this off to a client or another person to do something. This is just my own personal work. So no one's ever going to lay eyes on this or edit this at all except for me, right? So I think that also affects a lot of it. If I were working in a studio and um, I would be a lot more professional about a lot of these things as far as organization goes and stuff like that. But I think one of the beauties of being an end user, right? Like being someone who, um, you are the beginning and the end of the process, the pipeline, is that you can just kind of do what you want, right? You don't have anyone to answer to but yourself. And if you do end up with a messy scene and it's hard to navigate, that's on you, right? So, with that said, let's just jump into. I'm gonna start out talking from the very beginning, right? Just like gathering reference and stuff, and eventually we'll get into some more technical, cool things. So I hope you guys enjoy this. I would love to hear feedback on just this format of talking about my projects, because I would love to do more stuff like this, right? I would love to share my process. You see all these videos of people online and especially Instagram or YouTube Shorts where they just have like these amazing, like short process videos. And I want to be able to do that. But, the frustrating thing about working in 3D art is it's kind of boring, right? Like the process itself is fairly boring. You change a few settings, you render for 10 minutes, you change a few settings, you render for 10 minutes. Even when it comes to sculpting, I sculpt in a way that's just incredibly slow. I'll sculpt details and I'll smooth it out, and I'll sculpt details and I'll smooth it out. It's just the way that I work. I would love to be able to work in a more entertaining way, but it is what it is. So yeah, let's get started. My video feed here is going to go away, and you're just going to hear my voice because I want you guys to see the full screen and enjoy. I hope you guys, and I'd love to hear your feedback on this format of just covering my process. All right, so this is my PureRef reference collage or reference map, whatever you want to call it. So I do want to start out by saying I usually start these ideas out with some sort of sketch, and I did do a sketch. However, the sketch that I did looks nothing like the end result. I originally went into this with a very specific idea that popped in my head, like the origin of it, and it just changed drastically once I started actually getting ready to work on it. Right, like originally I wasn't even going to do a raccoon; it was just going to be like a stylized little guy, and I could even show you. I even started working on the character, and I'll show you that. Right, I'll show you, and I still want to use that character for something, but in any case, the sketch that I did looks nothing like. It doesn't even seem like it's related to the final image. So I just don't think there's really much of a point of showing it. I do like to do sketches along the way too, and you'll kind of see that eventually, like as I'm doing test renders and stuff, I'll occasionally take them into Photoshop and sketch on top of them to get ideas. But yeah, the original sketch, I don't think it's even really worth looking at, so we'll just skip over that. I started out in Midjourney. I started out with AI, just kind of generating some ideas, and the main sort of theme that I had in my head was this raccoon holding like this glass chicken. My mother used to collect these little sort of glass chicken bowls, and that's sort of like the that's one of the very sentimental things that I wanted to incorporate into this. So that's where I started out. You could see that Midjourney just couldn't get the concept of a glass chicken. No matter how descriptive I was trying to be with the with the prompt, it just didn't understand what I wanted with that. But I think this was a really good style guide, and I really enjoy using AI just to kind of generate ideas and kind of get you inspired. So that's kind of what I was doing here. I wanted it to have like this classical painting look to it, and I don't know if I necessarily achieved this look. I really do like this look, and it's kind of what I was aiming towards, but I don't know if the end result really, it just doesn't have the painterly feel to it. And that's just something that I would love to do more work like this. And I think I'm going to have to figure out some rendering tricks to get it to look more sort of painterly like this. But ultimately, this one was kind of the idea that I landed on as like my main inspiration. I kind of liked how you had this log sticking out here, and the magnolia flowers are a very important part of it as well. So this is sort of my starting point, and these days it usually is. Even I will do a sketch, but then I'll almost immediately just jump into Midjourney and probably spend a couple hours, while I'm watching a TV show or something, or even playing a video game, just generating some images to use as reference, not necessarily reference to like model from for like accuracy, but just more of like a style reference, right? So that's where I started. And then there was certainly some things in here that I knew I needed in the scene, like mainly the raccoon. And I needed images of a hairless raccoon, right? So I started scouring the internet for pictures of hairless raccoons, which oddly enough are kind of hard to find. Um, you know, I don't know why, probably just because no one wants to look at a hairless raccoon, but I did need to sculpt the body of this raccoon, and I wanted it to be as physically accurate as I could. I didn't get it nearly as physically accurate as I wanted to, right? There's a lot of proportional things that I got wrong with the sculpt. Um, but I also knew that he was going to be kind of covered in fur, so a lot of that stuff would get hidden anyway. And I will show you the sculpt of the raccoon, but So I just gathered a bunch of images of these little guys, and I don't know what it is about them. I think these are the coolest creatures, coolest animals. I've always said if a baby raccoon ends up in my yard, I'm gonna have a pet raccoon. um, but they're just really cool animals. So I gathered a bunch of pictures of them. I knew I wanted some magnolia flowers because those are very sort of sentimental to me. So I gathered a bunch of different images of the leaves and the cones. Magnolias have like these cones to them, and the branches and things like this. And I didn't necessarily end up modeling or creating a lot of this stuff that I gathered reference for, but at the time I didn't really know, right? I didn't really know all the details and everything that I was going to pull in or create for this project. So I wanted to just bring in as much as I can. And a lot of this got added over time as I was working. It wasn't, I didn't just, a lot of this stuff I didn't just bring in at the beginning. I would go to model the magnolia flower, and I would just spend like an hour looking for images of magnolia flowers, right? And bring them in here. So this whole sort of reference map here was definitely generated, created through the process of making the art. So it wasn't just all done at the very beginning. And then for the tree stump, I pulled in a bunch of images for like the turkey tail mushrooms, and just different tree stumps with the moss and stuff like that. This is one of the tree stump part of this project is one of the things that I was kind of in the end result. I was kind of disappointed about because you barely see it. And I actually put a lot of work into this tree stump and a lot of like creative ideas to get it to look kind of realistic. But we'll talk about that. I just feel like it's a shame you hardly ever see it, but who knows? I might end up using it for something else. We'll have to wait and see. And then hickory nuts. When I was a kid, there was just hickory nuts covered all over the place. They always sounded like shotguns going off when they hit our roof because we had a tin roof. So hickory nuts were very sentimental. And I grew up in Florida, by the way, North Florida, so swamplands. So a lot of this stuff is just reminiscent of that area and sort of that culture there. So that is that's all the images. Now that I'm looking at it, it's not really that much, to be honest. I would have expected that I would bring a lot more into it, but yeah, so that's all the images, my reference images that I ended up with. And so after this, I started working on the raccoon, and we'll jump into ZBrush and talk about the raccoon a little bit. Okay, so when I first started thinking about this project, the raccoon wasn't a part of it. I actually started working on this guy, and this guy was going to be like the focal point of it. And I still want to continue working on this guy and use him for something, but I was heavily inspired by an artist named James Jean. Just to kind of give credit to him because I do think he's an amazing artist. Here his website. He does a lot of 3D work and physical sculpture and illustration. I just think he's a really cool artist. I have a lot of like negative opinions about modern art, but this guy's one of the good ones, right? This guy does a lot of really really cool stuff, and I love his artwork. So the beginning phases of this, when I was first started thinking about it, I was really inspired by him and how he has like these minimalist stylized characters. And I wanted to do something like that, but with more of a sort of classical painting vibe to it. But I just wanted to give this guy a shout out because if you don't know him, he's an amazing artist. And very inspiring to me. So I just wanted to take a moment and talk about that amazing artist who does some really cool work, all kinds of different mediums, and yeah, check him out. So I just want to take a moment and show you this. I do want to finish up this guy, and I will probably use him in some future project. But I do want to kind of flesh out the sculpture a little bit more here. So then we have the raccoon. So here is I think this is, yeah, I think this is the one, the sort of like the final one here. So here's the final raccoon sculpt that I did. This is probably one of the most enjoyable things for me when I'm working on a project is just sculpting in ZBrush. I've always been it's just something that I've always loved, right? I love sculpting. I love doing like tiny little details and stuff like this. So this was one of the really enjoyable parts to this. And I had to sort of like stop myself at some point. I knew this guy was going to be covered in fur. I started giving him a lot of details in his face and neck and things like that. And you don't really end up seeing any of those details. And I did get I wasn't great with the proportions. I think his nose and snout should be a lot skinnier. I had a lot of issues trying to get the size of his eyes right, and I also think his ears should be a lot smaller. But at the end of the day, he's very obviously a raccoon in the final image. He was going to be covered with fur, so I did. You were going to see, like, I knew you were going to see his nose, so I tried to get in a lot of that sort of like nose detail, and I knew you were going to be able to see around his eyes. This little object here. Let's see if we can take a look at it. So this is just like his tear ducts, and I can't remember. There is a industry term for this. It's like a transitional object or something, like just the liquid that beads up around the eyeball. So did that. And his claws and his hands. I also knew his hands, his pads were going to be exposed, so wanted to try to get some of that detail in as well. So yeah, so I did that, and then the next step was to export him out, export out a normal map, do the UVs. So I won't go over the UVs here, but I took him into Maya. I did all the UVs. You'll see the UVs here in a second. I'll show you the Substance Painter file. And yeah, so that was the next step, is just diving in and doing the Substance Painter file texturing. I do think that I'm trying to remember exactly the process, right? I do think at some point I exported them out and I did textures, and then I didn't really like the result, so I went back into ZBrush and sculpted him a little bit more, and then exported it out again and redid the textures. So that's definitely not unheard of for me to do, is just kind of take 3 steps forward and 5 steps back, then 3 steps forward again. But you want to, if something's bothering you about the project, it's just going to continue to bother you, right? So like if you are annoyed by something, or just something doesn't quite sit right with you, fix it, right? Even if that means going back 5 to 10 steps, like just do what you got to do to make yourself happy with the end result. I also have here, just to kind of show you real quick. I don't know if we'll cover them. I also sculpted the hen bowl, the glass bowl here. So we'll take a look at that. This was a combination of modeling in Maya and then Dynameshing in ZBrush, like all of this detail with these lines and stuff. I actually did that in Maya, and when we get to it, we'll talk about it. But then this top lid part of it, I just sculpted for the most part. I think I may have made the original shape in Maya, like the base mesh, but yeah. So this, for the most part, was just a sculpt. And then I also have in here. We'll get to the stump. I want to talk about the stump in detail. But I did the shrooms, and I did sort of like I call it the fodder, like all the twigs and sticks and leaves and stuff like that, in ZBrush as well. All right, so here we have the raccoon in Substance Painter. So here you can see the UVs that I had for him. And yeah, nothing real crazy here texture wise. Again, I knew that he's going to be covered in fur, so I didn't really want to spend a ton of time here. But I did, try to get some layering stuff happening here with the skin tones that matched my reference and stuff like that. And This is actually one of those things that you sort of like you work on it, and then you bring it into Maya and you look at it and you start working on the projects and you go back to it. This is something that I actually went back to and edited multiple times as I worked on this. I would go and notice a little thing, and then I'd come back and fix it. And I wasn't obsessive over how good this looked, again, because I knew that he was going to be surrounded by chaos, and a lot of what you were seeing is going to be covered up. So you might look at this and say it's very sloppy, and I agree with you 100%. It is very sloppy. Just wait till you see the other texture that I'm about to show you. There was points where I got really frustrated with this, and I'll try to sort of explain why. For me, it's just it's part of the game, right? Part of the process is getting frustrated and having to go for a walk or a bike ride or something like that, and coming back to it. And I did that several times in this process. So this is just the skin here, and this is the UVs. I did UDIMs. I used UDIMs here because I wanted him to be very pretty high res. Again, even though you're not really going to see his skin much, I went into this with the mindset where I wanted to do everything from scratch, right? So nothing in here is a 3D scan, or I didn't use image textures at all. I did use some of the procedural features in Substance Painter, but I really wanted to sort of challenge myself with this and just do everything from complete scratch. You will see quite a bit of this that you may think is sloppy. Again, it's only for me, so I was fairly happy with the result, even though it was sloppy. Yeah, it is what it is. So I did the texture, and then I started working on the fur, and we'll jump into Maya and we'll talk about the fur a little bit. But then I started working on the fur, and to get the color of the fur right and the patterns of the fur right, I had to do a texture specifically for the fur shader, right? So I couldn't use the skin, otherwise his fur would just be like this weird brown color, and that wasn't very representative of a raccoon. So, and again, this is something that I actually edited, and once I did the fur, I would go back and edit it again, and I went back and forth quite a bit. At one point, I had an issue with Maya and multiple UV maps, or multiple UV sets. That was one of those frustrating things that made me walk away for a little while, because it took me a while to figure out the UV sets and getting that right and everything. But here is, and this looks very sloppy, I admit. And I look at this now and I'm like, man, what was I thinking? But this was just driving the color of the fur, right? So just trying to get like the color, the different color variations. You know, a raccoon fur is very peppered with like these white and brownish and dark colors. So I was just doing stuff, and you know, probably did this late at night when I was really tired, and I was just trying to get, I was just trying to get it to look good, right? So this is this texture you never actually see. It's just driving the color of the fur. There are still some actually there are still some things that I kind of want to go back and tweak, like the lines on his snout here. Once you see it in the image, you'll kind of see the fur with this black line in it right now, and the intention was that it was kind of lining up with the whiskers. I was trying to get like this organized chaos. And I think I would go back. I should probably go back and edit that and update that a little bit. But we'll see. You know, I always have an issue calling it quits on projects like this, or calling it finished, because I'm always like overcritical of these little tiny things that I can do better. But the other factor, right, is that as you're working on a project like this, you get these ideas for all these other projects, and you get really excited to start on all these other projects. So that's very much a struggle that I've always had, is just continuing to work on something and not start a new project. I would like to try, going off on a little bit of a tangent here, but I would like to try working on multiple projects at once at some point. I've heard a lot of artists say that it's a very productive thing to do, because when you do get frustrated with one project, you can walk away and work on another one and still be productive. And you can think about that other one as you're doing this other one. So I think I might even try that next. There's a few things that I have in mind. I really want to do a self portrait, and I have another similar project to this that I want to do. So I might try to juggle two at the same time. We'll see. We'll see how that works out. But yeah, and again, this texture that drives the fur color, I went back and forth with this quite a bit as I was working. But I will show you how I set the fur up. And yeah, so this is something that I did. You know, I didn't just create this and then go do the fur. I I did the fur, and then I came back into Substance Painter and I created this, and then I brought it over, and I went back. I went back and forth quite a bit throughout this process. So I don't want you to think that I made this and then just took it in and it worked. A lot of times that kind of thing doesn't get explained to you, and you just sort of think that, how did they know to do it like this? They didn't, right? So they did it one way, they brought it in, it didn't work, so they went back and redid it, right? There's, at least the way that I work, this stuff is not linear at all, right? It's there's you're constantly going back and forth and tweaking things as you go. So I think that intimidates a lot of people learning when they see stuff like this, because they, in their mind, they're thinking that it's all linear and you just did it and then did the next step. But it's never like step 1, 2, 3, 4, right? It's like 1, 2, 3, 4, 2, 3, 1, 5, 3, 4, 6, 2, 3, right? You're jumping around all over the place. So yeah, just keep that in mind. Okay, so the next step was to then bring the raccoon back into Maya and do a rig. And I did a very quick rudimentary rig. I didn't bother doing like IK handles or controls or anything like that. You can even see that his like there's like some weird tearing right here. I think I eventually ended up, this is an older version, and I eventually ended up fixing this, but I just wanted to show you the rig, and there's nothing complicated about it. It's just a very easy rudimentary rig that I just did to give him a pose so he's not like super symmetrical. Kind of makes him look like he's floating in space, and I wanted the glass hin to be sort of setting, being cradled in his arm. Um, and again, I knew in my mind that a lot of this stuff was going to be covered up, and you would never see it. Right? You're not going to see it in the final image. So I didn't. But you never know what exactly is going to be covered up and what exactly is going to be exposed. You can hide things when you're doing a project like this, for sure. But at the end of the day, it's better to just kind of anticipate that everything's going to be visible, because you never know. Once you start getting everything in 3D, it's not like a drawing, right, where you can just draw over something as you're working, right? And like say, oh, I want this object to be here, and it will cover up that thing. But then you just rotate the camera slightly, and then that thing that you were trying to hide is now visible, right? So with 3D, it's a lot more complicated, because as you're working, you're kind of rotating the camera around and adjusting the position and things like that, and you never know what's really going to be in visible and what's not. So you kind of want to go into it with the mindset of just having everything looking good, everywhere. So that was kind of it. And this is a bad rig. Again, I do think that I went in and I fixed a lot of this pinching and stuff that you see in here. But this is the basic rig. I had to do these long sort of bones like this to because he's got a very thick chest. But yeah, very very simple basic rig. The hardest part of this, the most frustrating part of this for me, is always uh, skinning, painting weights, skinning. I do not enjoy that process at all. Um, and if you're just doing a human character, it's not that difficult. There's some automated things built into Maya that makes it fairly easy. But that only really works if you're doing a humanoid character, not something like this. So, but yeah, that was the next step, is posing this guy, and because I wanted to pose him before I did the hair. I've never animated a creature with hair before. That might be something that I try next time. I don't think that it's particularly difficult. I just knew that was something that I wasn't going to be doing, so I didn't even bother like looking into it, and just kind of trying to figure out the order of operations in my head. I was like, I should rig and pose him before I do the hair. That way, I don't have to worry about that, right? So that's sort of what I did. And then we got into XGen, right? I put a few lights in the scene. So I put like, just some basic lights in the scene to get a good sort of lighting setup. Um, and, at this point, I had the glass hin sculpted, which is somewhere in here. Either I'm going blind or there it is. Right. So I threw that in there like he's holding. I mean, that was very important for the posing. I wanted to make it look like he's holding that. So I went ahead and modeled and sculpted that, and then put that in the scene, and kind of made him look like he's holding it, from most angles. And then I started on the hair, right? So if I unhide the hair, we should see it. So there's all his hair. And I originally started this, and I may do a video. I don't want to cover it too much in this video, but I may do a video just on XGen hair. But I started out doing this with the old school XGen method, right? Because that's what I knew. And it's always been frustrating for me. XGen is, it looks good, and once you kind of get the hang of it, it works well. But the whole painting map process in the classic XGen is very nerve wracking to me. I ended up doing it all with the sort of classic XGen. And then I ended up just looking at going to YouTube and looking up some tutorials on interactive groom. And I ended up doing just all interactive groom. And I can kind of take you through. Actually, let's do this on the final, because this may not be the final layout of all the hair. But yeah, I ended up using interactive groom, and it was so much easier and enjoyable to work with. And I'm never going to go back to using XGen the classic way. I'm going to stick to using interactive groom from now on. There are a couple videos out there sort of explaining it. It's very easy. It's very streamlined. It's so much more of a pleasurable experience than the classic way of doing XGen. It actually made me really excited whenever I started using it, because I was like, this is just so much easier to do, right? So yeah, highly recommend the new interactive XGen groove, XGen interactive groom. All right, now so this is the final sort of hair groom that I ended up with. This is actually the final scene. I just everything's just sort of hidden. So and then over here on the right is all of my different hair descriptions and collections, I guess, or groups. Now it's really easy to do to add a material to XGen hair, to add an Arnold material. Literally all you have to do is just assign the AI hair material to your hair, and then assign a texture to it, and that texture will dictate how you see, dictate the color of the hair. But again, I will probably end up making a video, just the process of this. I kind of need to do that for my students anyway. So, stay tuned. You'll probably see something like that soon, just kind of covering XGen interactive groom. But let me just go over all the different hair descriptions that I ended up with. It's difficult to use a lot of different hair descriptions and have it look good, and I was trying to figure out a way to reuse the guides, and there is a way to do it, but it's kind of complicated. And I had already sort of gone through the process of doing most of this stuff whenever I figured that out, so I didn't go through with it. But again, we'll talk about that a little bit more in a future video, where I just kind of cover XGen interactive groom. So I started out with a really short hair, right? I was looking at my reference. I had my PureRef and all my Raccoon references, and they all had like this really short, straight hair along their nose. So that's sort of what I started out with there. And then just sort of like another base layer of hair on the face, and then like the longer hair on the cheeks that gives it that raccoon shape, and around the eyes, right? So they have like these kind of long eyelashes here, and then the whiskers. So they have like these whiskers that each one of these descriptions have a different color guide here. So you can kind of see that the whiskers there are kind of matching those red guides. So they have whiskers, again, paying very close attention to my reference. They have whiskers on their eyes, their cheeks, and their sort of snout area. And then just some fuzz, right? They have like this soft fuzz fur around their nose. And then next were the ears. Going back, yeah, again, this is one of those things that I kind of want to go back and redo a little bit. But there should be like kind of another softer layer of fur in the ears. I don't know if it's super visible, so I don't know if it's really. I want to do it, but again, I'm kind of ready to call this thing done. But you'll see that he's kind of bald here, and I think there should be like a little bit of fuzz, some really fine hairs in here on the inside of his ear. I'm looking at like my dog's ear, and I'm noticing that there's still, even though you can see the skin there, there's a really fine fuzz on the inside of the ear there. So I kind of want to go back and add that now, but we'll see. I may not. And then the body, right? So just doing some basic hair on the body. I did the hands and feet separately because they have kind of like a very distinct sort of flow of their hair on their hands and feet. So I have a few different descriptions for the body, right? So we have like just a basic hair base, and then there's like a thinner fuzz, and then the long body hairs. The tail, again, this is something that I kind of want to go back and edit because I just didn't do the tail, just kind of looks messy. But you barely see it in the final one, so it's just one of those things that I don't know if it's worth going back and redoing because it's barely visible in the final image. And then the hands, right? So again, I wanted to control the hair very specifically for the hands, so I made different descriptions for those, and then the feet as well, right? And I actually think the feet, even though it's just one description, turned out a little bit better than the hands, right? So again, there's always a lot of stuff that you can do better. The question is should I try to do better on this project or bring that knowledge with me to the next project and just try to do better on the next project? So that's about it for the raccoon. Of course, there's a lot of tweaking that I do along the way, but the raccoon itself was, after I got everything right at this point with the hair and everything and the texture, and I had that issue with UV sets that was very frustrating that I eventually figured out. Um, but once I got everything right, the raccoon didn't change much more after that. So next, I want to talk about the stump, right? Because I did what I think is some kind of cool things on the stump. So that's what we'll talk about next. So I almost forgot about this, but I made a little diagram of how I actually created the stump. So I'll just kind of walk you through each one of these images here, and then I'll show you like the final, how it came out in the final. But I started out modeling just sort of like the outer husk of the wooden stump, just doing something very basic, and then I just basically took a bunch of cubes, stretched them out, and I used mash to just kind of cover this thing with these cubes like this. And actually, let's jump back over into PureRef and just kind of look at the reference here, just so you can kind of get an idea of what I was looking at, what was going through my mind whenever I created this. So yeah, so like if you look at some of these references here, is kind of what I was going for. I try to create like this outer part, and then I wanted to get all this sort of chaos stuff, and it looks, my end result actually looks pretty similar to this. And then there's some other examples here, basically trying to create all these splinters and stuff. And Like this one is a good one as well. So that's kind of like my mindset going into it. So I just kind of created, I wasn't worried about the bark. I was just kind of trying to create something like this without bark on it at first. Uh, so, so I just modeled this and I took Mash and I just created a bunch of little cubes. I just spread out like thousands of little cubes all over it and they're all kinds of different shapes and sizes to kind of get this just chaos going on. And then I combined everything together, took it into ZBrush, and I did a Dynamesh. And that was kind of chaos in itself, right? Like there was a lot of non-manifold geometry that was a result of that. So I had to do, there's a lot of back and forth of Dynameshing and then undoing and then changing the settings a little bit and Dynameshing again. And eventually I got it and I took the whole thing back into Maya. And then I used Maya's new flow retopology, which is because basically what I got from Dynamesh was just not usable, and I tried to Dynamesh and then Z remesh it in ZBrush, but the Z remesh just wouldn't give me a high enough poly count to get all the details that I wanted. So doing the Dynamesh and then doing the Z remesh just didn't work for me for whatever reason. So I did the Dynamesh and then I brought it back into Maya and I used Maya's new flow retop features, which is basically just retopologize, but you can kind of put it on a server on the cloud so it doesn't like lock up your computer, which was very, very handy because I was able to work on other things while that's sort of processing. So I did that flow retop, which gave me something decent. And then I took it. I can't remember if I did the UVs on it at this point. I may have done the UVs on it at this point. I can't remember. One of the reasons I'm so disappointed about the stump in this project, because it turned out good and I spent like a solid 2 days working on it, but then you barely see it in the final result. So that's kind of why I'm a little bit bummed about the whole stump part of this. But I'll definitely probably use this in other little projects if I get a chance. So I'll just kind of keep it in the library and use it later. So at some point I did the UVs on this, and then I took it back into ZBrush and I sculpted it a lot more. The UVs also, by the way, were a lot, right? Doing the UVs on something like this sort of complicated, that was a lot. It's kind of a nightmare, to be honest. But in any case, I did the UVs. And I took it back into ZBrush. I sculpted some more wood detail, and I actually just used some of the default brushes in ZBrush and the default alphas. I didn't download a wood pack or anything like that. I just used the default, right? Again, one of the main goals of this project was trying to challenge myself by doing everything from scratch and not using downloadable assets and things like that, because I feel like I'm at the point in my skill set where I can do things like that, right? I'm observant enough to see how the colors and the textures and things like that, where I can do these things without downloading these brush packs or using scan data and stuff like that. So that's there's nothing wrong with that, right? Nothing wrong with using scan data. It was just like a personal challenge that I gave myself in this situation. So that's what I did. So then in ZBrush, I just kind of used masking to mask off the outer part, and then I extracted it, and then I sculpted the bark, right? And then I generated a normal map. So then I did the UVs for the bark, and in Maya, right? So I sculpted the bark, took it into Maya, generated the UVs, took it back into ZBrush, extracted a normal map for both the interior and the exterior. And then this is what it looked like when I got it back into Maya with the normal map applied to it. And then I took it into Substance Painter and I painted it. Right. So it turned out pretty good. It doesn't look as sort of like realistic as I wanted it to. There's like soft round corners and stuff like that, and I wanted it to look kind of like really jagged. So I tried a trick which I'll show you in a minute, but if I could do it again, I could probably do it better for sure. So will I ever actually end up using this asset again? Maybe for a background piece, but I actually think if I did this again, I could redo this way better. So I'd probably, if it were like a main asset piece, I would probably just redo this again, or do something just specific to the project that I'm working on. But this could totally be like a background piece, right? It could be a stump off in the background that's kind of blurry from depth of field or something like that. So that's what it ended up looking after I textured it in Substance Painter. And then here it is in Maya, when I have the mushrooms applied to it and the mushrooms on it. And these, again, I just kind of sculpted these in, actually, I'll talk about the mushrooms here in a second. But the other thing that I did once I got it back into Maya, the stump, is I used the mash technique again. I made a bunch of these little cubes, and then I just generated, I just kind of spread them out all out over the stump, to give it like this jagged, splintery look on the inside. And it worked out pretty well. There are still like parts like right in here that looks really round that I'm not super happy with. But overall, I think I learned a lot, and I think I'm kind of, proud of myself for kind of thinking my way outside of a box and kind of trying to figure out innovative solutions to kind of get the look that I was going for. Again, I could probably do it better if I did it again. But I overall, I think I'm kind of, pat myself on the back a little bit for figuring out an innovative solution for this. And then the mushrooms here. So there's a lot of mushrooms, not a lot, but there are some mushrooms. Ultimately, what I did here with the mushrooms, is in ZBrush, I just modeled maybe 4 or 5 mushrooms. I wonder if I have them here. So I have shroom 1, 2, 3. So let me actually just unhide these so we can see them. So yeah, in ZBrush, I just modeled 3 mushrooms. Right, so here's all 3 of those mushrooms. And let me just turn off the texture. Or let me just turn on default texture so you can kind of see the models here. Whoops. So there's the models of the mushrooms. I just modeled those in ZBrush, and textured them in Substance Painter. And then I used Mash to just kind of place them randomly on the stump. But what I did is I took a part of my bark here. So let me see if I can just unhide that. It's way off of where it originally ended up. But I basically just took some, actually I used QuadDraw, and I just drew some new topology on top of my bark. And I used that as a plate to generate my mushrooms on top of. So then I just used Mash, and I just generated up those 3 mushrooms just randomly on this geometry, that I just used the bark to kind of create. So if I kind of move this around a little bit, you'll see how it sort of lines up a little bit. And all those mushrooms were just generated randomly, random sizes, random orientations on that mushroom plate that I have there. And then I adjusted them, right? So I didn't just leave it as it is. There were some that were kind of penetrating through each other, going through each other. There were some that I just deleted, some that I kind of rescaled. So after I did that, I adjusted a lot of them, to just make sure that they're not going through each other. They all look good and like a natural sort of growth to them. So I did that little mash trick, and then I just kind of generated them randomly, and then I adjusted them all. So let's see. I think we're kind of getting towards the end of what I can talk about here, but let's just kind of go through the rest of this scene and talk about what else we have here. So I have these desert rose flowers, and this was actually something I did for another little tiny little test project that I did, creating these desert rose flowers. So I brought them in. I thought, why not use them in this project too? They're kind of cool looking, and I like them. So I actually brought them in, and they also have like a little bit of a sentimental meaning to me, or sentimental value to me. So I thought it would be appropriate if I used those. And then we have the magnolias. Let's see, these are the magnolia cones and the magnolia flowers. So the way I did the flowers and the cones, actually, let me see if I can open. I think I have a separate file here for these. Let's go to open scene. There's a lot of stuff here, right? So again, don't be too harsh on me when you're criticizing my organizational skills, or be harsh on me. I don't care. I'm probably not going to change my ways, uh, just to, I'm just going to, I'll definitely try to be better in the future because it's kind of frustrating like this. But we're all growing creatures, right? We all grow. Okay, let me see if this is the file that I want to look at here. Okay, cool. So yeah, this is basically, in my head, I'm always thinking of the most optimal way or order to create things where I can kind of reuse things to create bigger objects. So when it came to the magnolia cones and flowers, I thought in my head, like, how can I do this in a way where I'm not modeling every single petal, flower petal, or every single seed on the cone? So basically, what I ended up doing here is I modeled three different flower petals. I UV'd them, and I textured them. I modeled the cone here, which is a very rough cone. Again, UV'd that and textured it, and then I modeled this sort of center thing here. And I just did this in Maya. I didn't do this in ZBrush. I just kind of modeled it in Maya. Basically, what I did is I just did like one tiny little ring with these little divots in them. I duplicated that up, right? Combined it all together, and then I took a lattice deformer and deformed it into that shape, and then I took the sculpt tool and kind of sculpted it around a little bit. And then I also modeled like a single seed here, right? So then I modeled these, I UV'd them, I textured them, and then I built my objects with them, right? So after, like, these things were complete, right? So don't look at what's below this. These things were completely modeled, UV'd, textured, and then I used them to kind of build this cone out, right? So again, using Mash, I used Mash to kind of just populate these throughout. And then I used my sculpt deformer again to kind of sculpt them around, and they're already textured, already UV'd, so I'm not worried about like messing anything up too much there. But then I use my sculpt deformer to just kind of sculpt them around, making sure that they're not kind of going through each other too much. You can see that there are still some that are kind of going through each other. And then I use the flower petals and all of those objects to model a flower. And I even kind of altered the model a little bit too, right? So you'll notice that this petal doesn't have any sort of tears in it. But then after I got the flower together, I went in and just kind of took my multi-cut tool and cut away some areas just to kind of make them each look a little bit more different. And again, I also use my sculpt tool to kind of make them look a bit different. So, and then I did the same for like this little bundle one. These you don't even really see in the final scene, but they are in there. But yeah, you always want to try to work optimally and think of orders of operations. So in my head, I was like, I can just do three petals, minimal amount of objects, put them together, and then I can sculpt them around and edit them to give them a lot more variety, right? So that's how I ended up with those magnolia petals. So let's go back to that other scene. We'll go back to just my finished project scene here. Let's go open recent. And let's see what else we can talk about. So then I did the hickory nuts. The hickory nuts are a very similar, it's going to take a while for this scene to open. The hickory nuts I did in a very similar fashion to this, right? I modeled just like the minimal pieces. I UV'd, I textured them, and then I varied them all. So I did a lot of different variations. Um, Same with the leaves, right? So the leaves I modeled just a couple different leaves, and I did this thing right here. This is actually really interesting. When I was a little kid, these were all over the ground. These long little, you can probably see one like right here, right? So these long little stems. And what these were actually from is the magnolia leaves, right? So like when the magnolia leaves die, like the leaf part will kind of deteriorate away, and you'll be left with like this really long sort of stem, right? So that's kind of in my head. That's where I created those, and then I just used one for like a leaf stem as well, and I just kind of placed the leaves on there. The hickory nuts I did in a very similar fashion. I just modeled, let's see if I can find one here that's kind of apart here. So we can see a whole one. So here's a whole one right here. And they're all combined together, but it's basically, I modeled two corners or two quarters of those, and I just kind of placed them together. And then there's some of them like, let's see, and then we have the nut, and the nut I just modeled one half of it, and then I put it together to get a whole, right? So in some situations we see a whole nut, like right there's a whole nut. So I just again, I created them all like as little pieces, and then I put them together in a bunch of different variations. So even though they're all like only 4 or 5 models, they look like 15 different variations of that same model, right? So some of them were whole, some of them had started to open up a little bit, so you can see the nut inside like that. Some of them are just halved, right? So you can see the husk and the nut there. The sword, the wooden sword here, not too complicated. I just sculpted that in ZBrush and textured it in Substance Painter. And then you're also going to see a lot of little pieces of debris here. So I just made a bunch of little spheres and cubes and these little sort of confetti type pieces. I wanted there to be like almost glitter surrounding this, right? Like little tiny sparkles of light. So that was the idea about these, and then I just used mash uh, to kind of spread them out in this ring. These originally were just palm fronds, right? So just like green palm fronds. And I noticed that when they were green, you just didn't really see them much. And I don't know why. I like gold. I like the look of gold. So I was like, I wonder what they look like if I made them gold. So I just made them gold, and it looked cool. So I just kept it that way. But these were originally, and they still are, they're just kind of golden palm fronds. But these were originally just meant to look like palm fronds. And then it was just a lot of time spent experimenting, right? A lot of time spent moving things around. Here you can see those other magnolias that we don't actually even see much. But there was just a lot of experimenting going on. Um, I'm trying to I'm trying to do less effects in post. So like less effects in Photoshop and stuff like that, like depth of field. I wanted to do more of that in the render itself. So I tried to, I got the depth of field going in Arnold. I wanted there to almost be like a little bit of a flare. Let's actually look at the render here so you can see what I'm talking about. So you can see like the palm fronds back here ended up being gold. Originally, I had like a light emitting from inside the glass chicken, and I ended up just moving it above, and it looked a little bit better. Um, you can see that we don't really see much of the stump at all, right? You can see the mushrooms and stuff, but not much of the stump. You can see a little bit of it back here, right? And a little bit of it in here, but otherwise it's barely visible. Um, these little glowing leaves, again, just completely experimental, right? I originally I had like like one of the magnolia cones up there, and I just thought it was distracted and distracting, and so again, just kind of playing around with the position of things. I put a couple of these like little leaf branches up here, and I was like, that looks kind of cool. What if I just made them like a glowing white color? And, completely experimental how I ended up with that. Now, if you'll notice here, there's a very faint little glow around this whole thing that kind of goes from red to blue right here. Again, this is just like a completely experimental thing. And what I did is I just took I took a torus, I made it a mesh light, and in the color for that, I just added a ramp, and I just kind of played around with the colors a little bit, and that kind of gave me this glowy little, almost like a lens flare going on around here. Um, and overall, that's it. I'm pretty happy with the results of this. There's always going to be things that you can tweak and change and do differently and do better. And there's a lot of this stuff that I still want to kind of go in and fix. But overall, I'm pretty happy with this. And it just gets me excited to work on the next thing and make something even better next time, or like a higher quality, and step up my game. I'm always trying to step up my game a little bit. So I actually have a little as I was creating this, I made like some progress renders. So I actually have a little video that I made. Let me see if I can find it here on my desktop. So here's a little video just kind of quickly going through all the renders that I did. You can see, let me stop it right there real quick because I want to talk about this. So what I will do occasionally as I'm working on a project like this is I'll just take a render, take it into Photoshop, and just draw on top of it, right? And try and get what I'm, try to just brainstorm and stuff. And you'll see a lot of experimentation throughout this process, right? Like I had this ring around it, and I thought that looked pretty good at the time. And then, as I went forward, I removed the ring, and then I was like, well, what if I made it look like he's reaching towards a little glowing light or something? You can see the light being emitted in there. So you can totally see sort of like the evolution of this project in these renders. And I really enjoyed doing this. I'll probably do this from now on, right? Like making these little progress renders. Right. Playing around with different angles. I really like some of these early renders a lot. And they have a certain feel to them, or a certain contrast to them. And I kind of, I see like a lot of these other renders, and I'm like, oh, it looked really good back then. How can I kind of bring that into the finished product? But I think it's just the nature of the beast, right? It's gonna evolve, and the best thing that you can do is just sort of like let it let it evolve over time. But some of these early renders like actually looked pretty good in my opinion. I think I like them. Here I threw the flowers in. They weren't textured, or didn't actually have the textures hooked up at this point. So they're just kind of a white translucent shader. I was like, oh, well, let me take that glowing light and kind of make it look like he's looking up at this glowing light. And I had one of these cones floating above his head. And again, playing around with different angles. I brought in the glass buoy. All right, a lot of these really cool. A lot of these early renders look really cool to me with just how the light and the translucency and the flowers and stuff like that. And here, this is just like a proxy for the sword. So I was like, I want to see what this looks like once I bring the sword in. At some point, I realized that the flowers just kind of look too big. So I decreased the size of those. I kind of zoomed in and kind of, rearranged. We see the sword in here now. I brought those desert rose flowers in, playing around with the lighting a lot. I had the idea to do the palm fronds in the back, so I just started out by making some discs and putting those back there. And I wanted there to be like sort of like an organized chaos around the entire thing. So I started just using Mash to generate a bunch of objects surrounding it to just get a visual idea of what's going on here. And then I just assign them like the wood texture that's on the stump. And then a lot more sort of organized chaos. Here is just a lot of little minor tweaks, right? So I brought those palm fronds in, made them gold. Here's where I used those stems. They were way too big, so I eventually made them smaller. Right, and then I just have like a little zoom in for it. So that's it. That's sort of like my process for the whole thing. Let's bring up the image here just so we can kind of look at it while I close out here. I hope you guys enjoyed this video, right? Just me talking about my stuff. Again, I'd like to figure out a way to share my progress of things as I'm working on it, because I think you miss a lot of you obviously missed a lot of stuff with this explanation, but I still hope you guys enjoyed it nonetheless. Hopefully this video wasn't too long, and if you have any suggestions of how I could possibly do this better, or if you really like this, right, just let me know, and I would really appreciate the feedback. I would like to record some or render out some videos of this. It's just going to be one of those things where my computer is either going to be locked up for days at a time rendering out the videos, or I might end up trying using a rendering service, like a cloud rendering service or something. Because overall, this isn't a super complicated scene. There's not really any deformations or animations or dynamics or anything like that going on in it. So I may try like one of those rendering services once I get everything sort of animated the way that I want to do some cool videos. So yeah, I hope you guys really enjoyed this. This has been my TED Talk. And just let me know what you guys think in the comments, and I will see you next time.